I am James's chief secretary. I was hospitalized due to stomach cancer, but James kept it a secret from me, bringing in a fresh graduate art student as an assistant. I kindly took her out for meetings to help her familiarize herself with the business, but she was simply persuaded by a partner to have a drink, and then falsely accused me of making her drink. James angrily smashed the bottle at my feet. Why did you make Sophie drink? Do you think everyone conducts business over drinks like you? The glass shards scattered, cutting my face. But he turned a blind eye and turned to comfort Sophie. Don't be angry, it's okay, I told her to get lost. In the past, I would have insisted that James fire Sophie. But this time, I truly feel exhausted. When James stormed into the office in anger, I was busy reviewing contracts. He strode right up to me, he grabbed my wrist, forcing me to look up at him. Sophie had just graduated, innocent and pure. You mustn't drag her down. Because of this, she cried all night last night. If there's ever another gathering like this, you should go by yourself. Suddenly pulled out of a tense work state, I realized I had forgotten to eat again. Having just undergone surgery, my stomach couldn't handle this kind of turmoil anymore. At this moment, a dull pain began to creep in. James built his business from scratch, always lacking a confidant to help manage affairs. Therefore, I became his chief secretary right after graduation. At that time, I knew nothing about the job, but because I felt sorry for James, I stopped him from drinking glass after glass at the table. It can be said that James's achievements today are all earned by me, bottle by bottle. However, due to long-term irregular eating habits and immense stress, I unfortunately developed stomach cancer. I was hospitalized for treatment recently, but James mistakenly thought I just had a minor cold and never came to visit me. What's worse, he secretly brought back a young secretary named Little White Flower. In a daze, James suddenly let go of my hand and pushed me hard. His face was gloomy and he coldly blamed me. Why are you so calculating? Sophie texted you to apologize yesterday. Why didn't you reply to her? I picked up my phone and saw that I did indeed receive a message from Sophie, but the tone was very unpleasant. Emily, I was really too naive, having never encountered such a situation. I thought you were asking me to join you for drinks, and caused you trouble. I'm really sorry. Last time Sophie bumped into Mr. Thompson, it led to that deal not being signed. I tried my best to persuade him and finally convinced Mr. Thompson to give us another chance to collaborate tomorrow. In the past few days, I'd been busy with this matter and had no time to check my phone. I was explaining while holding my aching stomach, not noticing the situation. James shot me a cold glance and shook off my hand. He said coldly, "You should apologize to her sooner. Don't bully the young girl just because you're older." The stomach pain grew more intense, and my back gradually became damp with cold sweat. Seeing me, clutching my stomach and remaining silent, James finally noticed something was wrong with me. His expression softened a bit and his tone became gentler as he asked, "Emily, are you okay?" He hurriedly tried to find me some medicine but realized there was no medicine in my drawer, only vitamins and other health supplements. He immediately stood up. The worry on his face vanished in an instant and coldly said, "You don't even have any stomach medicine. What are you trying to pretend? Do you think you can use a pity strategy to win my forgiveness?" I trembled all over and tears streamed down uncontrollably. James forgot. The last time he broke a bottle in front of me, I was taking medication, and as a result, the medicine on the table got soaked with alcohol, losing its effectiveness. I lifted my head, wanting to explain. "It was because of what you did last time," but before I could finish, I was interrupted by a ringing sound. James answered the phone without hesitation. "Sophie, what happened?" His voice was gentler than I had ever heard. Sophie's voice was choked with tears, making her seem very wronged. "James, I was scared and couldn't sleep because of what happened last time. I was going to go to the hospital to ask the doctor. I accidentally got into a car accident. I really don't know who to ask for help." James felt extremely heartbroken upon hearing this, and immediately comforted her. "Just wait there, don't be afraid, I'll be there soon." I was in so much pain that I couldn't sit up, and a metallic sweetness surged in my throat. I struggled to call out to James, "Can you take me to the hospital?" He turned around, kicked my desk irritably. "Emily, you're old enough, how can you not go to the hospital by yourself? Sophie is younger and doesn't understand anything. The little girl James mentioned is only 5 years younger than me." The door was slammed shut, causing the floor to shake. With tears in my eyes, James resolutely turned and left, never looking back again. I lay on the desk, and it took a long time for me to recover. At that moment I realized my wrist had already been marked by James's grip. I wiped away my tears, calmly ordered some stomach and pain relief medicine for myself. After payment, I received a message from Sophie. "I'm sorry, Emily, I was really scared, so I asked James for help. Please don't be mad at him." My fingers moved slightly, and I opened her moments. The first post was just uploaded. She accidentally had a car accident, so I made a call, and the boss immediately came to help me handle it. The accompanying picture was a candid shot of James, standing in front of Sophie, calmly blocking the angry driver on the opposite side, his half-profile revealed, showing his furrowed brow and worried expression. Below, a colleague commented, "Mr. Wilson is so handsome. When will you be able to pursue him?" Sophie did not deny her relationship with James. He just sent a vague emoji to brush it off. James has always been unwilling to publicly acknowledge our relationship. I don't know if it's because he's worried about others' opinions of me or if he has some disdain for me. The answer seems obvious. The employees at the company don't know that James and I are married, but Sophie must be well aware. Otherwise, why would she show off in front of me multiple times? I stared at the tall figure of James in the photo. My heart suddenly ached. But years ago, when the Wilson Group was just established, I was still just a young girl stepping into society. Due to James's mistake, he left the contract at home during a business negotiation, so I had to drive alone to deliver it. That was the largest deal we had taken on. I was extremely nervous, afraid of messing it up, but I ended up getting into an accident on the way. The car was mangled from the impact, blood was flowing from my forehead, and my whole body felt like it was being torn apart. At that moment, I truly felt the blood flowing out in waves. My arm was immobilized due to the dislocation. That was the closest I had ever been to death. I felt overwhelming fear, and with my last bit of strength I cried and called James for help. "James, help me, I was in a car accident." On the other end of the line, I heard the sound of a cup shattering, followed by James's furious shout. "At such a critical moment, you actually got into an accident? Are you trying to ruin the company?" I pressed on my wound, trying to stop the bleeding this way, desperately pleading, "I'm going to die, can you come and save me?" However, what I got in return was his exasperated response, "I'm very busy right now, I don't have time for you. You're an adult now, can't you handle these little things?" Before his words fell, the phone was ruthlessly hung up. I was covered in blood, handling the aftermath of the accident all alone. The doctor advised me to stay in the hospital for observation, but all I could think about was the company, so I eventually dragged my injured body home. As soon as I walked in, a thick contract was suddenly thrown at my head, hitting my wound perfectly. The wound, which had just healed, was reopened. Blood splattered onto the contract, forming red blossoms. "You actually know how to come back. If it's good that you're not dead, why didn't you bring the contract over? Such a big deal, and it slipped away because you submitted the contract late." The next day, James forced me to apologize to the client. The client smiled, staring at me and saying, "If you want to apologize, you need to show sincerity." James kept smiling apologetically, gripping the wound on my arm, and through gritted teeth whispered in my ear, "Hurry up and apologize to Mr. Wang." I suppressed the metallic taste of blood rising in my throat and the lingering pain in my body. I raised my glass under Mr. Wang's lecherous gaze. I drank glass after glass of the wine that James personally handed me. I understand the meaning conveyed by his eyes, so after signing the contract I make an excuse to go to the restroom. I escape back home. It's just a memory, yet I cannot erase the pain buried deep in my heart. I pick up my phone and send a message to James, "If you have time, let's talk about the divorce." The next morning, James was already waiting for me in the dining room, and he had bought breakfast. This was the first time in 2 years that I had breakfast with him. He seemed to be trying to please me, pushing a bowl of wontons in front of me. "Emily, yesterday I really didn't consider your feelings, but the situation with Sophie is quite urgent. She is also very innocent." I shot a cold glance at James, telling him I don't eat scallions. When we first started dating, James could remember all my food dislikes. Even when the restaurant sometimes overlooked it and put scallions in my dish, he would pick them out one by one. James's expression suddenly froze, and he awkwardly spoke up. I know, he forgot. After all, the person he cares about now is no longer me. I put on my bag and said to him, "Let's go, we're supposed to apologize to Mr. Thompson today." James stood behind me reluctantly saying, "Emily, are you really divorcing me over this small matter?" "I won't divorce you." I didn't show any emotional fluctuation and answered with my head down. Are you done talking? If you're done, let's go." Maybe it's because I didn't have breakfast, my stomach started to ache faintly. All the way, James kept glancing at me, opening his mouth to speak but stopping. I have always valued my relationship with him, and I would never make jokes about this marriage based on past events. This is the first time I actively brought up divorce. At that moment, Sophie called again. "James, the person who hit my car yesterday seems to be looking for me. I'm so scared." James suddenly slammed on the brakes, asking in surprise, "What?" He hesitated for 2 seconds, turned to me and said, "Emily, you should take a cab to meet Mr. Thompson. Sophie is in danger." My heart tightened and I looked at him in disbelief, "But this contract is very important." James's expression darkened instantly, his brows furrowed. "Don't you have a lot of experience? Can't you just finish this deal by yourself? What if Sophie gets retaliated against by those people? Do you really want her to die?" James jumped out of the driver's seat in anger and forcibly dragged me out of the car. He saw me clutching my stomach again and angrily threw me on the side of the road. "Trying to fake illness again, huh? This deal was lost because you took Sophie to the dinner without permission. Do you still want to ignore it?" After he said this, he stopped talking to me and drove away without looking back. Mr. Thompson likes peace and quiet and doesn't want to be disturbed. Therefore, we agreed to meet in a secluded place, choosing a winery in the suburbs as the location. I was left on the side of the road, with very few people around, making it impossible to catch a ride. But I knew this deal was something I had worked hard to secure through countless connections. I absolutely and not let my efforts go to waste. I suppressed the nausea churning in my stomach, dragging my painful body step by step towards the winery. But as soon as I reached the front desk, I lost consciousness. When I opened my eyes again, everything before me was a blur of white. Mr. Thompson and his assistant were by my side. Mr. Thompson looked a bit awkward. "Emily," I called James, but no one answered. I forced a smile, asking Mr. Thompson to take me to the hospital. We are just ordinary business partners, yet he actually canceled his schedule to personally take me to the hospital. As for my husband, James is probably lost in the arms of a beauty right now, and doesn't care about my life or death at all. Mr. Thompson seemed to understand something and subtly said to me, "If you encounter any difficulties in the future, you are always welcome here." Although I am not a perfect wife, but I am definitely a competent secretary. This is well known in the industry. There were times when someone extended an olive branch to me, but I turned them all down. However, James somehow heard some rumors and came home drunk and out of his mind, pushing me down on the sofa. He was gripping my neck tightly with flames of anger in his eyes, threatening me, "Emily, how dare you seduce other men? Are you that desperate? You will never leave me in this lifetime." I came to my senses, glancing at Mr. Thompson. "I will think it over seriously." Just then, James suddenly kicked open the ward door and walked straight to my bedside. He stood in front of me like a fierce beast and threw the gift box heavily onto my stomach. The pain hit me almost instantly, and I convulsed in agony. My body curled up. Cold sweat poured from my forehead. I bit my lower lip and barely held back from shouting out. James shouted, "Emily, how dare you have Mr. Thompson act with you?" Just as he was about to take further action, someone beside him reached out to stop him. It seemed James only then noticed there were 2 other people in the room, and he was stunned. "Mr. Thompson, you," hearing the commotion, the doctor walked in with a frown. "What's all the noise about?" He saw me curled up on the bed and then looked at the furious James, instantly understanding what had happened. The doctor called the nurse to check on me and turned around to throw a thick stack of reports at James's face. "What are you doing? How could you even hit a patient? Take a good look. She has stomach cancer. Today, only half of her stomach was removed. If they had sent her in a little later, she would have lost her life." James was in disbelief, trembling as he knelt on the ground, picking up the test results one by one. After the nurse gave me a dose of painkiller, she glanced warily at James and then followed the doctor out of the ward. Mr. Thompson's gaze swept back and forth between me and James, and he understood in his heart. He nodded at me and said softly, "Emily, you can think carefully about what I said. I have something to attend to, so I'll leave first." After they all left, only James and I were left in the ward. The air was so quiet that only James's suppressed breathing remained. His eyes were red and he looked at me in disbelief. "Emily, is this real? Last time you only had a cold." I glanced gently at the man still kneeling on the ground, sighing. "James, if you came to the hospital to see me once, you wouldn't think this way." Half a month ago, James said he was going on a business trip to the neighboring city, and he readily handed over all the matters of Wilson Group to me. I was so busy handling everything alone that I eventually collapsed at my workstation. It was a colleague who came to work the next day that took me to the hospital. Over the years, to help James stabilize the company's position, I've already exhausted my health. So when I heard the test results, I wasn't surprised at all. When the doctor told me that I needed a relative's signature for the surgery, I made my first call in days to James. As soon as the call connected, my ears were filled with loud music and noise. James sounded a bit impatient, his tone revealing his displeasure. He asked, "What's the matter?" I held the phone helplessly and hurriedly spoke before he hung up. "I'm sick, and I might need to have surgery." A sweet voice called from the phone, "Mr. Wilson, who are you talking to?" James covered the receiver and replied coldly, "I take good care of you every day. What illness could you possibly have? A little medicine is all you need. Even if you want me back at the company, there's no need to come up with such a low-level excuse. If you can't handle the company's affairs, just tell me earlier. I'll find someone to replace you." The phone was ruthlessly hung up. The doctor walked in with the surgery confirmation form. "When will your relatives arrive?" I shook my head, smiling at the doctor. "Doctor, I'm not going to have the surgery. Just prescribe me some medicine." But later, I endured the pain and returned to the company, but James brought back Sophie to take my place. Not just as a secretary, perhaps also in the role of a wife. I snapped back to reality, seeing James frozen in place. He seemed to recall the times he spent with Sophie. He had no mind to pay attention to me. He knelt by my bedside, gently holding my hand that was receiving an IV drip. "Emily, I'm wrong. No matter how much it costs, I will find a way to cure you." I stared at the faint lipstick mark on James's cuff, feeling a wave of disgust in my heart. I pursed my lips and withdrew my hand. "If you really want to make it up to me, then agree to the divorce." James's eyes were slightly red, his lips trembling as he said, "It's impossible. I won't divorce you. I really can't live without you." How ridiculous. Wasn't he getting along well with Sophie not long ago? Why is he suddenly saying he can't live without me now? A wave of exhaustion and helplessness surged from deep within. I closed my eyes, no longer looking at him. Not knowing how long it had been, a drop of warm liquid fell on the back of my hand and was gently wiped away. When I woke up again, it was already the next morning. A needle on the back of my hand had long been removed, and my hand was carefully tucked back under the covers by him. I hadn't sat up yet when I heard James's voice. He was curled up on the small sofa by the bedside, his eyes bloodshot and stubble had grown on his chin. "Emily, are you feeling better? I'll go buy you breakfast." Perhaps worried that I would refuse, he didn't wait for my response and quickly ran out. In fact, not long after I started dating James, I also fell seriously ill. I was worried about disturbing James, so I didn't tell him about my condition. However, he still learned my hospital room number from classmates and kept vigil by my side day and night. Every time I opened my eyes, the first person I saw was always James. At that time, I felt truly lucky to meet someone who selflessly cared for me. However, none of us anticipated that James would later become so different. Whether it was my hospitalization due to stomach cancer or the car accident a few years ago that nearly cost me my life, he seemed utterly indifferent. My life and death seemed irrelevant to him. At this moment, watching him rush out swiftly, I felt a wave of disorientation in my heart. Is this a belated guilt? That I no longer need this? Soon after, James returned with a bowl of steaming wontons. He opened the small table, carefully helped me sit up. "The doctor said to eat something light, but you hate drinking cognac the most, so I bought you a bowl of wontons." He secretly observed my expression and pushed the wontons in front of me. Don't worry, this time I didn't add any scallions at all. Although I don't want to have anything to do with James at this moment, I still slowly picked up the spoon and started to eat. Since I decided to leave him and start a new life, I can't neglect my own health, right? Seeing that I didn't refuse, James finally breathed a sigh of relief, and his tense body and mind relaxed as well. Just as he was helping me clear the dishes, the phone placed by the bed suddenly rang. I reached out to grab it, and the screen prominently displayed the name Sophie. James was also taken aback upon seeing it. This contact was changed by her herself. I'll change it back shortly. I nodded nonchalantly and pressed the answer button. Sophie's affected voice immediately came through. James, where are you? Didn't you say you would take me to the amusement park today to cheer me up? I've been waiting for you for a long time. Her tone sounded very affectionate. I once tried to act cute with James, but he bluntly expressed his annoyance with me. Emily, you're already in your 20s. It's about time you stopped acting cute. It's not just about being cute. Later, I showed him a little concern, but James only responded with impatience. Got it. Leave me alone. We're becoming more like a couple that just goes through the motions. James suddenly snatched my phone and spoke bluntly. Sophie, you're just my assistant from now on. Call me Mr. Wilson. Also, isn't it working hours now? If you keep slacking off, just walk out. After he finished, he hung up the phone and sneaked a glance at me. Emily, if you don't like her, I can fire her right now. I think this is ridiculous. How can someone change so quickly? Not long ago, he was still holding Sophie and ruthlessly said he would fire me. I turned my back to James. No need, I'm tired. You can go. Why fire her? Keeping her might still be useful. James seemed determined to stay at the hospital. I couldn't help but ask him, why aren't you going back to the company? He was silent for 2 seconds and stubbornly replied, your illness isn't over yet. I want to stay with you. But you don't have to worry, I've already made arrangements. Except for particularly urgent matters, everything else will be handled by my assistant. Assistant? I couldn't help but laugh. Does James mean Sophie? She can't even handle business well, and James actually trusts her with such a big company. I thought for a few seconds, closed my eyes and pretended to sleep. After hearing the sound of James leaving the ward, I took my phone out from under the pillow. I logged into my email and sent the resignation letter I had written earlier to James's work email. Within a minute, I received a reply that my application had been approved. Looking at that eager reply, I couldn't help but smile slightly. Thanks to you, Sophie. If it weren't for her help, I definitely couldn't have resigned so easily. I happily opened WeChat and sent a message to Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson, I have made up my mind, and I am willing to be your most capable assistant. Mr. Thompson quickly replied, okay, Emily, your talents should not be wasted. Seeing this message, I suddenly remembered something my university professor said many years ago. Emily, your talent is remarkable. Your talent is outstanding. I suggest you study abroad. Focus on this industry. Your abilities shouldn't be hindered by emotional trivialities. However, I ultimately chose a completely different path. For James's future, I unhesitatingly gave up my profession to become his most trusted secretary. I turned off my phone and let out a soft sigh. After staying in the hospital for nearly a week, James finally agreed to process my discharge. Before we even got home, James's phone rang. James, there's a disturbance at the company. Please come and handle it quickly. Though reluctant, James had no choice but to drive over. I silently returned to the room and started packing my bags. When I flipped to the photo album in the drawer, my actions involuntarily paused. The album was filled with pictures of me and James together. After we confirmed our relationship, James would always save money to take me on trips. Every time we went to a new place, he would take a photo of us together, calling it our beautiful memories. However, the last photo was taken 4 years ago. After the company was established, James often traveled alone. Of course, there might also be women like Sophie accompanying him. As for me, I could only act like free labor, left behind at the company to handle various trivial matters. All things related to James, I ruthlessly threw into the trash can. The divorce agreement that had long been prepared by someone else, I casually placed on the coffee table. I looked at this home where I had lived for nearly 5 years and gently closed the door. Goodbye. When Mr. Thompson arranged for the assistant to take me to my new residence, the assistant mentioned the commotion at Wilson Group that afternoon. I heard it was due to a building invested in by Wilson Group collapsing, resulting in several casualties. When I received that call, I had already suspected something. The previous person in charge had come to me multiple times, hoping I would agree to Wilson Group's investment. But after I visited the sites several times, I felt the risks were too great, and ultimately chose to refuse. I didn't expect the Wilson Group to still get involved in this trouble. It no longer concerns me. In my new home, I finally enjoyed a long-awaited good sleep. Mr. Thompson said I could rest for a few more days, so I comfortably stayed at home, ordering a nutritious breakfast. The doorbell rang. I opened the door and was shocked to see a familiar figure. Sophie stood at the door, gritting her teeth with visible scars on her face. She extended her hand, angrily pointing at my nose. "Emily, you little bitch. If it weren't for you, how could I have been pushed to be the scapegoat, and how could James have abandoned me?" Through Sophie's accusations, I finally understood what happened yesterday. Sure enough, as I suspected, the deceased family and other owners went to the Wilson Group to confront someone. Coincidentally, both James and I were not there, so Sophie, a nominal presidential assistant, became their target for venting. The group found someone to unleash their anger on, and they attacked without hesitation. While Sophie was being attacked, she threatened them, "If you dare to hit me, when James arrives, I will make sure he has you all arrested." Upon hearing James's name, the group became even angrier, only thinking about the trouble he might face. By the time James arrived, those people had already been pulled aside by security. As soon as he entered the office, he saw my desk was empty with nothing left. Sophie rushed over in tears, wanting James to help her take revenge. But James firmly grabbed her collar and questioned her. "Who gave you permission to throw away Emily's things?" Sophie burst into tears, explaining with grievance that it was Emily who submitted her resignation. "I just approved it." James was furious, angrily pushing Sophie away, and asked, "Why did you do this? Didn't you say that you should only be notified about urgent matters?" "I didn't think this was a big deal, so I just approved it directly." After hearing this response, James was so angry he paced back and forth in the office. The crowd outside began to shout loudly again. James suddenly stopped and lifted Sophie off the ground. "You agreed to this contract too, Sophie. You must bear the consequences." James unhesitatingly threw her out, shifting all the responsibility onto Sophie. "Emily, I don't know what you did to James when he clearly loves me the most. My experiences today are all because of you." Sophie was trembling all over and waved her hand at me. But she was covered in wounds. How could someone like me, who has been in the hospital for a few days, be her match? I quickly grabbed her hand and pushed her down onto the ground at the door. "Sophie, this is all your own doing. You signed that contract yourself and insisted on approving my resignation. It's also you who, knowing James has a wife, still recklessly approached him. This is all caused by you." Sophie lay on the ground, gasping for breath as she said, "It's impossible. James clearly promised me that as long as he divorced you, he would marry me. How could he possibly deceive me? How pathetic. Another person like me deceived by James's sweet words. Those who were deceived by James's sweet words." I am too exhausted to argue with her anymore. As I was about to close the door, Sophie blocked the gap of the door with her hand. In almost an instant, the back of her hand swelled up. Just then, James's exclamation came, "Emily." He hurriedly rushed in front of me, frowning as he carefully checked if I was hurt. Sophie found it hard to believe that James was ignoring her like this. She struggled to stand up, trying to grab James's arm, but he easily dodged her. She wiped the tear stains from her face, forcing out a smile, and said, "James, my hand got caught in the door. It really hurts. Please take a look. It's all swollen." James impatiently interrupted her. "Sophie, I already made it very clear yesterday, there's no relationship between us. You should turn yourself in quickly. Don't drag down the Wilson Group." Sophie's eyes were filled with disbelief. She slowly lowered her hands and questioned, "Why? Why are you treating me like this? You clearly said not long ago that you wanted to marry me." James was slightly taken aback and quickly turned to explain, "Emily, don't listen to her nonsense. I never said such things. You will always be my only wife." The two argued back and forth. Who is right or wrong no longer concerns me. Sophie's hand slipped to her belly, her emotions spiraling out of control. She screamed hysterically, her voice echoed in the hallway. "James, what do you mean? Are you planning to deny it? What about the child in my belly? Do you want him to be born without a name or identity?" Although I have decided to cut ties with James, when I heard the news of Sophie's pregnancy, a wave of faint sadness still surged in my heart. I have been with James for 8 or 9 years. He has always placed great importance on safety measures. Even though we have a deep bond, when I was willing to have a child for him, he unhesitatingly refused. "Emily, the company is still unstable. We don't have time to take care of a child. Let's talk about this later." We dragged this on for year after year, and I never got to have a child with James. Looking back now, his refusal at that time might have been a good thing, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to leave so decisively. James clearly paused for a moment, but when he saw my expression, he ruthlessly told Sophie, "Find a time to terminate the pregnancy. This child shouldn't have existed in the first place." He did not deny his relationship with Sophie, and it made me feel a wave of nausea. My stomach, which hadn't eaten breakfast, started churning, and the urge to vomit grew stronger in my throat. I stepped back, facing the two standing outside the door, and said, "This is all between you, it has nothing to do with me. If there's nothing else, please don't disturb me again in the future." Just as I was about to close the door, I remembered that agreement. "James, remember to sign the divorce agreement I left on the coffee table when you get home." I couldn't hear what James said next, nor did I want to hear it anymore. I don't know when James and Sophie left that day. After staying at home for 2 days, I couldn't help but report to Mr. Thompson's company. He didn't decline either and assigned me some tasks. It seems that only by working continuously can I gradually diminish James's shadow in my heart. The next day, I went out on a business meeting with another assistant of Mr. Thompson. Just as we got out of the car, a disheveled woman suddenly rushed towards us. A knife in her hand glinted menacingly in the sunlight. A gentle breeze blew, revealing her twisted, hideous face. It was Sophie. She was bleeding continuously from her lower body, holding a knife in her hand, shouting at the top of her lungs, "Emily, go die, only when you die will James love me again." The people around were scared and fled in all directions. No one dared to step forward to stop her. Just as the knife was about to fall, a warm and familiar figure stood in front of me. The sound of the knife piercing flesh echoed in my ears, followed by James's voice, "Emily, are you okay?" I shook my head, my gaze following Sophie, who was pinned to the ground by the late arriving security guard, my heart filled with panic, supporting James in front of me. "I'm fine, I'll go call an ambulance." James seemed not to feel the pain on his body, reached out to wrap his arms around my waist, and softly said, "Let me hold you, Emily." Then he fainted in my arms. Sophie's knife nearly grazed James's heart just a little off, and he truly wouldn't be saved today. I sat in front of the hospital bed, gazing at his pale face, and couldn't help but sigh. "James, we clearly could have had a great future." I called a nurse to take care of James, and then headed to the police station. Sophie was a bit disoriented at that moment, repeatedly mumbling that she was James's fiancée and was about to marry James. I explained our relationship to the police, and after the record was completed, I asked if I could see Sophie one more time. The police agreed. When Sophie saw my face, she instantly came to her senses. "Emily, why isn't it you who's dead? He clearly said he loved me." I sighed. "Sophie, I have been with him for 8 or 9 years. I've heard this kind of talk countless times, but he still cheated and got together with you." I shouldn't believe his words. Sophie was lying on the interrogation table, crying uncontrollably, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Just as I walked out of the police station, the nurse's call came in. "Emily, the patient you asked me to take care of insists on seeing you, and he said if you don't come, he'll go find you himself." When I rushed to the ward, the doctor was reapplying medication to James's reopened wound. Upon seeing me, his eyes instantly lit up. "Emily." The doctor scolded him a few more times before finally walking out. I quietly sat by James's bedside, thinking to myself, it's all because of your mistake, that so many people have suffered. James hurriedly wanted to explain. It said that Sophie approached him herself, and it has nothing to do with him. I couldn't help but laugh. If she came to you on her own, would you have jumped at the chance to be with her? Did you not feel a hint of guilt or unease in your heart at that time? James fell silent. The ward was quiet. Maybe 2 minutes passed, or maybe 5. "So, is there really no possibility for us anymore?" I looked directly into his eyes. "From the moment you interacted with Sophie, you should have foreseen this outcome." James struggled internally for a long time, and finally he softly said okay. He lay on the hospital bed, his face haggard, and he looked completely listless. I nodded, turned around without looking back, and walked out with my bag. In that moment of closing the door, I saw James's tears flowing uncontrollably. One wave after another, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't dry them. I thought to myself, James, this time I really have to say goodbye to you.